Hi, Internet. I'm Andromeda Yelton, and this is the first episode of Open Paren, where I talk to awesome people in library land and beyond who are into code. I hope some of them will be beginners and some of them will be experts, and they'll be working on all kinds of problems, and it will be super fun. Today, I'm super excited that our first guest is Cecily Walker, a librarian too at the Vancouver Public Library, as well as a member of the editorial board of In the Library with the Lead Pipe, and an upcoming keynote speaker at DLF Forum, which I wish I could go see, but sadly is on the other side of the continent from me. But yeah, we're going to talk to Cecily about stuff that she does in code and greater technology. Let's see. You know, the first thing I want to ask you is indirectly your fault because you got me totally addicted to the podcast that I am ripping it off from, which is, what do you do and why?
What do I do and why? I'm a librarian at Vancouver Public Library. It says in my Twitter profile, tech, not books. So it's weird. I'm kind of in a limbo right now because I'm on medical leave. And right before I went on medical leave, I was in a temporary job. And that job was to be the librarian in charge of community digital initiatives. And that was Vancouver Public Library's really fancy way of saying digital humanities projects. And so I was in charge of that project or that portfolio for about 8 months. Before that, I was the librarian in charge of websites and online engagement. So that meant that I was in charge of all of VPL's public-facing websites, web properties, and their social media channels. And I did that for about, I did it as at the supervisory level for about roughly 3 years, on and off. And before that, I did it for 5 years as an entry-level librarian. So I've pretty much worked in the same department since I got to VPL. But I kind of walked away from my web services job because I was a little burned out, to be perfectly honest. And I am now in a situation where I know what's next, but it's temporary, and I don't know what's going to come after that. So when I go back to work in 3 weeks, I think I will be working on a job primarily concerned with our Islandora repository, which is where our digital humanities projects will be living. But after that, who knows?
Well, so one of the things that I've always really liked about your tech work is that you are always taking on new things and trying new stuff and maybe being super excited about it.
And failing at a whole lot of them.
Right, because, well, that's how you learn, right? But I know when we were talking before the episode, you mentioned that learning was a particular interest of yours. So I have a lot of questions I could ask about that because I love teaching people how to code. But I guess I'll start with, it sounds like you're about to take like a flying leap into learning a new tech stack. So in that, or in addition to that, like, what are you looking to learn next? What's the tech thing that has you excited about learning right now?
Oh my gosh, there's so much that I don't really even know where to begin. I took part in the Skillcrush, they call these career blueprints, and they had one career blueprint that was all about front-end development with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then they also had, which I kind of know, but I don't know enough to feel like if somebody asked me to do something in JavaScript and jQuery that I could just whip it up like that. I could probably do it with some research, but that's more of a confidence thing and more about me than it is about what they were teaching. But anyway, I'm getting off the track. The other career blueprint that they had was a Ruby developer, Ruby and Rails. And there's something about Ruby, even though I will frequently swear on Twitter about how much Ruby is making my life a living hell. There is something about it that made sense to me. And I had seen some things very early on in my career at VPL that the New York Public Library was doing with Ruby. One of the things that they did that I got really excited about, and this was several years ago now, so I mean, it's probably all old code, but they had done a thing where when you got to their website, they had a survey. And the survey would say, would you mind if we asked you one question? That was it. That was the barrier. That was the entry point. And then after you ask that one question, the survey would say, well, if you have time, can we ask you one more? And after every time you answered a question, it would just engage people in that very friendly kind of way. Like, we don't mean to bother you, but it's only one other question. And they had done that. They designed that so well that they were overwhelmed with responses. They could not have dreamed how many responses that they got. They got so many that they had to stop the survey. Because they had designed it that way. And at the time, I was the user experience, doing more of the user experience into things at the library. And I was really excited about trying to do something like that to gather some research about the public website. But the developers, the web application developers that we had at the time, they didn't know Ruby. And they didn't really have the capacity to try to pick it up, because they weren't just the web application developers. They were responsible for keeping all of the applications, whether it's accounting or cataloging, you name it, running in the library, and there were only 2 of them. So they just didn't have the capacity. I really wanted to learn it, and I felt bad at the time that I couldn't, but I kept coming back to it, and I kept seeing really neat things that people were doing with Ruby and with Rails. And I just thought I'd give it a try. And even though it frustrates me, I really like it. And I think this is probably the only programming language that I've stuck with for any length of time. I don't consider HTML or CSS a programming language, but this is the only sort of real, honest to goodness programming language that I've stuck with any amount of time. So hopefully I won't give it up yet.
Yeah, I've tried to learn Ruby a number of times, and actually I might be doing a project in Ruby for people for money soon. I was very explicit that, like, I will do your project if you understand that I will be learning Ruby along the way, and I will, like, cut my rates because of that. But if you're cool with the fact that I don't know what I'm doing, I can do your project. But yeah, I've bounced off Ruby a bunch of times before, and I'm only, like, just starting, I think, to sort of get into the zen of it.
Yeah, one of the projects that Skillcrush had was to build a weather forecasting and and the code is up on GitHub if anybody wants to look at it. And so I built a little forecasting engine where if you enter the name of your city, or if you enter your postal or zip code, it would give you your current conditions, and it would give you the forecast for the next 5 days. And it's something that's I mention that now, and anybody who's a more seasoned developer would look at that and go, you basically built the equivalent of FizzBuzz. But I'm really excited about it because I built it, and I sweated over it for so long. I slogged over this thing for Skillcrush says that generally their task will take anywhere from 2 to 10 hours to complete. I think it took me 2 weeks to get this. And when I finally got it to run, I was so excited and so pleased that I finally made it work. So yeah, I think that might be it.
Well, I think that's one of the critical sort of emotional skills that people need to be successful at learning, is you have to have that feeling of this is awesome, that makes the reward for the weeks of this sucks and I don't know what I'm doing, because everyone's going to have those weeks, possibly repeatedly over and over on end.
So when you're talking about learning, one of the things that I think that I would like to learn is how to think like a programmer, because clearly I don't. I don't think I think like a programmer at all. I don't think in linear, clear steps for a solution to a problem. I always come at a solution to a problem from around the corner, which it can be a hindrance when you're trying to do development work. So I don't know if you have any ideas about that. I'd love to hear them.
Man, I think I mostly have angry ranting about that, honestly, because I felt like that for so long. Like, I don't think like a programmer. My undergraduate degree was in math, and I don't think like a mathematician. I was really good at math, but I didn't approach it the same way as most people in my program did, and I couldn't engage in conversations about math in real time because there's this like incredibly cognitively demanding translation step from like how I actually think about math to ways that I could admit in public to thinking about math that like wouldn't be stigmatized.
Yeah.
Or like doing my homework, I'd be like, okay, I see like how this goes. And that was 10% of the time. And then 90% of it is like, how do I write it down in a way that I won't fail? Which was, soul crushing, and when you're 19, you're like, oh, it's me. And no, it's not me, and it's not you, right? It's like there are different ways to think that are legitimate. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this library technology report I wrote recently about librarians who code is this quote of Misty DeMayo's that I just like keep coming back to, right? That she read Wise Poignant Guide to Ruby, and the line that stuck with her was something about how programming, you would be writing stories for a machine.
Yeah.
And that worked for her. And that sort of storytelling narrative mode is not what you see when you see people talking about thinking like a programmer, but air quotes, like programmers have lots of different minds. And when I realized that, in fact, I also think in a sort of narrative way, and if I'm going to write a program, I sort of start with like telling myself the story in comments and pseudocode, and then slowly transforming that into code until it is broken in interesting ways, and then fixing it. And it's I can be very logical, and I can like emulate logic really effectively because math major, but I'm not Spock in my head. And I feel like you're supposed to be like that in your head to be like cool, but you don't have to be. I think for me, learning how to think like a programmer has been learning how to like kick to the curb the ideas about how I was supposed to think, because I don't think that way. And B, learning how to leverage the skills I do have. I'm not super like step-by-step propositional logic-y in how I think.
Yeah.
But I am good at getting like intuitively to the big picture solution with like blinding speed, and then having to figure out how to write that down.
Yeah.
But you take your cognitive strengths and you make that the core of how you make programs work. I think reading Test-Driven Development, the Obey the Testing Goat, Harry Percival's book, that helped for me. Your mileage may vary. And just doing it long enough that there were things that were easy, so I didn't have to be stuck on those, Yeah. That's the awesome thing about the weather program, right? The point isn't that you wrote a weather app. The point is that you fought through things that used to be hard until they became easier, and now you can build on them and do more.
Yeah.
That's true. So would you recommend Skillcrush to people who are learning? Because people always ask me about that.
Would. And the number one reason that I would recommend Skillcrush is it's a very practical reason. Once you pay for your blueprint, whatever it is, and they have a wide variety of blueprints, you have access forever. So the blueprint, you can either pay, I think it's something like $399 up front, or you can parcel it out like over 3 payments of like $150 or something. But once you've paid, you have access to your content and their content forever. And that's something that a lot of online programs don't do. More, the more typical model is that it's a monthly charge, and you go in when you can, and then when you don't have when you can't go in, or your life gets in the way, very few of these programs will allow you to pause your enrollment. There are a few that do, but they'll continue to keep charging you whether or not you use the system or you're actually learning anything. So that was the thing that I liked about Skillcrush the most. I also really like that even though they seem to emphasize it less in their written materials, if you go to their website, you can tell that they're targeting women. And all of their branding and everything that they put out, on their website, in their newsletters, they are always interviewing women who have either completed their various blueprints or women that are working in the tech sphere in a variety of ways. And they make a point of doing these free on-air seminars or these free hangouts with prominent people in the industry who can come in and talk about anything, whether it's about building your business, like teaching people actually, biz dev skills, or teaching people things about, how to crack the ceiling in tech, or what have you. And they make these things all free and available to people. And the way that they break down their courses is that if you can carve out 10 minutes a day, you can really progress. Now, the skills or the tests that they'll give you at the end of the big module will take you more than 10 minutes. But literally everything that you go through, every single part or chapter, the way that they organize it, will really only take you 10 minutes. And it's open, it's personable, they are really approachable. The CEO, I guess, of Skillcrush, she personally answers email. And they also use the Mighty Bell online community as a way of keeping people who are enrolled in the various blueprints connected to each other so that they can support each other. So it's sort of like a chat thing, but they keep it running. So if you, like for me, I joined one of the blueprints in like 2014 or something. And if I wanted to go in and hang out in the chat room for people who were in my cohort, they would still be in there. And there are people who have, you know, either progressed or people like me who just kind of paused, but there are people who went through the program at the same time as you did. So you can still keep those connections open, or you can just pop into any of the hangouts for people who are going through the blueprint now. So in case you want to offer support to people who are going through it now. It's an excellent program, and I recommended it to so many people. I spent so much money on online learning, from everything from Treehouse to lynda.com to Drupalize Me, you name it. And Skillcrush is the one that I would recommend wholeheartedly above and beyond any others.
Wow, that's really impressive to me about the cohorts and the email, because it's always seemed to me the hardest part of online tech teaching is building the community and also just the emotional skills, right? Because if you're taking a face-to-face course and you're frustrated, you don't have to stay frustrated for super long, because maybe your instructor's right there in the room and they look over your shoulder and they're like, oh, a semicolon or whatever, and you're not frustrated anymore. But with online courses, people can just be like, oh, I'm spending a week not knowing what I'm doing and there's no support and I feel terrible and I go away, you know. That's impressive.
I mean, there's a little bit of that, which you can't really help when people are in different time zones around the world. But I have posted something in the middle of the night out of frustration, and there's somebody there, like, or I'll get an answer just a couple of hours later. So
how big are the cohorts?
I don't know if they limit it to a certain size. I think the first one that I was in the front end development was something like 30 or 40 people, but I don't know that they limit it by size.
Yeah, it's striking to me that would be enough people to generate that speed of response.
Yeah, or maybe those are just the 30 or 40 people who checked into Mighty Bell, because you aren't obligated to check in and participate in those in the chats or anything. They're there for you to help you, and some people like doing that kind of stuff, and some people really hate it. So there were 30 or 40 of us who were really, really active.
That's really neat. It's sort of one of the problems that's bugged me, is like, how do you build that community, especially because the librarians, like as you were noting, many workplaces that have librarians who code don't have more than like one or two of them. Yeah. And don't have much or any time during the workday, which is a whole other rant. Is like, so you're benefiting from people acquiring these skills, but you're not going to support them getting them, and that's a problem. But but it does mean that people need to have online learning communities because they may simply not have any other options. Right. Which is a problem that I mean, that's really a lot of the problem that got me into like, how do you teach librarians to code? Because the emotional problems are often harder than the technical ones. Yeah, that's true. That's true. And that's another reason why something like, God, I feel like this has turned into a commercial for Skillcrush, but one of the things that I really liked about them is that it worked around your schedule. Like, you didn't have to be in a certain place at a certain time. So, you know, somebody like me who lives with a chronic illness, I just never know from day to day, and sometimes from hour to hour, how I'm going to feel. So doing something like a code club hangout, for example, I might agree to it, and then when I get down to the day, I can't do it. But Skillcrush is always there. And so if I have those 10 minutes, I can just go in and sit down and do those 10 minutes. If I have a question, I can pop into Mighty Bell and somebody will be there, or I'll get an answer in a short amount of time. So it's just the flexibility. I've never found anything that has that kind of flexibility and that kind of attentiveness where you can be assured that somebody's on the other side of the computer. It is pedagogically remarkable to me that they can have 10-minute chunks that are useful. But in the interest of not just being a commercial skill
Yes,
crush,
I'm sorry.
no, I mean, that's great because I know that a lot of people are always asking me, like, how do you learn and what are good resources? So I'm totally glad to have another one on the list. But let's talk about a different like code learning community, because I know you've done some stuff with Maptime, and I know basically nothing about who they are or what they do, and I'm really curious. So tell me about Maptime.
Maptime is an organization that was created to make GIS, which I really can't think of what it stands for, Geographical Information Systems Science,
I think so.
more open and amenable to all kinds of people. So I like to think of it, they called themselves a knitting circle for maps.
Cool.
So what they would do is they would hold meetups, and they would either be around teaching you a specific skill, like how to use OpenStreetMap to develop a particular map. That's just a sort of kind of, this is an example. And they would just set up, and if you have your own computer, you can just come in and sit down and just learn. No pressure whatsoever. And as you went to more of their events, they tried to make their skill sets or the sessions that they would do to just sort of ramp up and build on the one that was previous. That wasn't always possible. But the thing that I really liked about Maptime is that if you were just somebody who expressed an interest, and you didn't have to have like a geography or a GIS background at all, because I certainly don't. I was trying to work on building a map for a project that we were doing at VPL. And I figured out how to do it by using a code sample that I found on GitHub from Lizzie Diamond, and who is really, really into, or was, I don't know if she still is, who is really involved with Maptime, but she went to, she was a Code for America fellow, I think, in this last year. Anyway, so it's, I had to step down from Maptime because there was a lot going on for me personally, like health-wise, and I just didn't have the energy to do it anymore. But essentially, if it's kind of like, it's part meetup, it's part knitting circle, it's part code club, and it's also a really great social opportunity because it gets you in that space where you're sitting across the table from someone face to face who has knowledge and wants to share it, and they want to do it in as I guess, low barrier kind of environment as possible. So nobody's really saying anything like, oh, this is really stupid. Everybody is super supportive, and it doesn't matter what your level of skill is with geography or GIS. If you want to learn how to build a map for your own personal reasons, if you want to learn how to build a map of, you know, how many times you've encountered unscooped dog poop in your city, and you can get that kind of open data from your city, you know, you can take that into Maptime, and they can show you how to build a map of it. So it's a really, really cool organization. They're online at maptime.org. So if you would like to find out more about them or see if they're in your city, there's so many Maptime chapters around the world, not even just around North America. And anybody can start one. So if anybody out there has an interest in learning anything like about JavaScript open notation or JSON, or wanting to learn how to build a map, or wanting to learn how to do data visualizations, Maptime is the place to go.
Huh. Now I'm really wondering if my city, which has a great deal of open data, has information about dog poop in their data sets. So they've got a lot, but that's very granular.
Dog poop was maybe a bad example. They do have one of the maps that I've seen that I really liked a lot is somebody took the pet license database, and they isolated dogs, and they did a map of New York City of the most popular dog names in certain neighborhoods in New York City.
Aww. Could you just like totally tell where Brooklyn was? Just from the names?
There are lots of Ellas and Stellas and Bellas and that sort of thing.
So like popular girls' names.
Yeah. So
their pets are like their babies.
Yes.
Oh man. You know, I was also curious in terms of projects more generally. Who do you think is doing the coolest projects in greater library land tech these days? Or which projects do you think are just like awesome?
I feel like I haven't really been paying that much attention because I've just been up my own rear end for so long, but there is a project, I wish I could remember the name of it. So I might just take a second and go and look it up. Give me a second. We can edit this out, right?
Maybe.
Okay.
Speaking of learning, I have no idea how audio editing works, but maybe I'll figure that out in the next 24 hours.
There's a project that I found out about when I was doing some research into digital humanities, when I decided to co-present this keynote with Chris. I was reading Miriam Posner's blog, and Miriam is somebody who's really, really well known in the field of digital humanities. And she wrote this, she put up the notes from her keynote, or the text of her keynote, and it was a blog post that's called "What's Next? The Radical Unrealized Potential of Digital Humanities." And it's
I totally had that in my notes to ask you about.
And because you and I had a conversation about this, and one of the things that she talks about is that, you know, maybe the field of user experience doesn't allow people to critically engage with the data that they're seeing, and maybe the point isn't to always make things easier. So she mentioned a project called, and I'm looking for it now. Hold on just a second. It's a really long. Okay, it's a project called the Knotted Line, and it's a timeline, but it's a timeline like no other timeline like I've seen. So it's the subject is about the history of confinement in the United States, whether that's from, you know, you're dealing with enslavement, or you're dealing with, like, you know, the prison industrial complex, what have you. And through a series of paintings and historical tidbits, you can go through this timeline and try to discover information about, you know, particular historical events. But the timeline isn't linear. It loops around itself. It's reversed. So where you think that you're starting at the beginning, you may actually be starting at the end. And people were so frustrated by this interface that, you know, they were like, well, if it's making me have to work this hard to use this interface, then why should I try? And the developers said that the point of the entire project was to show how difficult it can be for people of color or other marginalized people to try to navigate these structures that aren't created for them. So they're trying to navigate, you know, the police system, or they're trying to navigate the legal system, or they're trying to navigate, you know, getting aid from the government, what have you. And all of these kind of structures that are essentially built to keep marginalized people out, and the levels of frustration that marginalized people have to deal with every day. So they design the interface intentionally to be confusing, to throw up barriers, to help people think critically about their position in the world and how the privileges that they enjoy are equally available to everybody else. Now, there are some people who think that this is successful, and then there are some people who think this is a really crazy idea. I loved the idea of trying to take an interface, or trying to take a system and design it in such a way that makes people really critically look at and engage with their position within the system, to try to just look at it from the perspective of, I'm not just neutral. You know, I don't bring anything to the table, because so many people think that technology is neutral, to get people to realize that, no, there's nothing neutral about it. And, you know, whatever advantage you have, no matter how small, is something that may not be available to everybody else. And then what can you do as somebody who's a technologist when you're designing technology, not necessarily to design it to a degree that it's going to be so confusing, but what can you do as a technologist when you're designing systems to try to incorporate different ideas, different perspectives, different experiences, so that people who are coming at your system from, you know, and they're bringing their own baggage to your system, that they can be successful in such a way, but without dumbing it down. So for people who may be a little bit more who have a little bit more means or who might be a little bit more technologically proficient, maybe make the system intentionally a little bit harder so that they'll feel a little bit more challenged. Whereas people who don't necessarily have those means, how can you design the system where they feel like that they can get through and be successful, but that they're not being pandered to? So it's that kind of critical engagement with technology that I get really, really excited about, rather than just always harping on or preaching the gospel of ease of use or don't make me think, which is something that the book by Steve Krug that a lot of people talk about, but to get people to think again and think about their position as technologists who are designing systems, and what that means.
And you had a user experience background as well, if I recall correctly, right? So that must have been sort of like Ray
My
and
head just
melting
went.
is like dogma. Do you have any like interfaces in your head that you're wanting to build now as a result of these ideas?
Well, one of the things that the projects that I was working on before I went on medical leave, one of the digital humanities projects that I was working on was a project to digitize, which essentially means photograph, these quilt panels that commemorated the lives of missing and murdered women from Vancouver's downtown east side. Essentially, there were women who were they were street involved. Some of them were sex workers. Some of them were drug users, and they either ended up missing or they turned up dead at a pig farm outside of Vancouver. Oh. And not like intact, like their remains scattered everywhere. And so the story of these women, as it gets told in the popular media, is only about their street involved life, you know, the bad things that had happened to them and how they had run-ins with the police. And when people who were from the downtown east side community wanted to do something to commemorate the women, the only photographs that they were getting from the police were mugshots. And they were saying that they don't want these women to be remembered this way. So what they did was they came up with a program that was very similar to the AIDS quilt, where they had friends, family, loved ones, or members of the community to get together and have sewing circles. And they taught people how to sew, and they made these 18 by 24 inch quilt panels to commemorate the women's lives. And so that was a project that I was working on, and we were working on photographing those panels and trying to come up with a way to display this information. And, you know, we could do it as information professionals, we're bound by certain, I don't know, responsibilities. We have to make sure that the collections that we put online are easy to search, that they're easy to scan, that people can easily find the information that they need. But one of the things that I was trying to get my team to think about was how else can we display this information in such a way so that people don't look at it as this is something that something bad happened to. How can we also develop an interface that somebody could either toggle on and off, that would be more of a narrative thread, that would actually be more of that would connect these people in terms of the stories of their lives. Are there some things that we can do with, and we consulted with and have members from various First Nation communities in the Vancouver Lower Mainland area advising with us on the project, to say, are there certain traditions that you can help us with as a partner with us on this project, that maybe me as somebody who's not Aboriginal wouldn't have access to? How else can we tell these stories so that it's more resonant and relevant to people, and that people don't just look at it as, fancy pictures on the internet? And unfortunately, that was when I had to go on medical leave, just when we were starting to dig into that. But I'm looking forward to going back to work in about 3 weeks and seeing where we've come from that point, since I've been away for almost 2 months. But just the idea of, when you are creating a collection that targets a specific community, is there a way that you can design an interface that has meaning? What does that meaning actually mean? Like, how can you make it be something that goes beyond, like, putting, designing it in colors or putting images that, the stereotypical First Nations images that you might see. Is there another way that we can present this information in a critical way to tell these stories? But because we're a public library, we also have to be really careful about not politicizing it. But I don't know how you can tell these stories without politicizing it. So it's making us try to be creative, and it's making us have to really challenge our own perceptions and the own biases that we're bringing to the table, and to try to consider things from a perspective that you may not have had. And so it's been great for us to go out into the community and have them sit down with us and advise us on the project from every step of the way. So it'll be really interesting to see what we come up with. And I know that there will probably be some pushback, but we'll see what we can do. We'll see if we can make it so that it's not just your typical online gallery where you go, oh, there's a picture, that there's actually something a little bit more meaningful there.
I take it this is not online yet.
No, not yet.
I eagerly await seeing it, because
I will publicize it as soon as it's available.
I mean, this gets to so many of my favorite questions about technology, because to me it's like the ethical issues are unavoidable. I don't know how people write code without tripping over some sort of issue of what values am I encoding, just like constantly, because it's always there. And I was talking in a panel last week where one of the things I was talking about was like absences in metadata, right? We have these schema, and I made fun of Dewey, right? Because like the 200s are basically like 200 through 290 or 280 Christianity, and like 290 is everything else, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of puts you in a bind, right? Because if you want to make a system, a computational system that can engage in computational conversation with other systems, you have to tell your story in terms that are recognizable to like the broader data ecosystem, but that may not be a story that is actually an honest reflection of the participants' experiences at all, and that may be a scheme that leaves no space for them.
Like when you're looking at a MARC record and you're doing cataloging, and I don't ask me what the field number is, but you can have a special field to add some additional data that might have more resonance to like your particular community, but it's a special field. It's not the first thing that's going to come up, right? So even though we're making room, but we're not putting people at the center. And what I'm more interested in is if, as librarians, as technologists, if we are going to continue to try to, not that we're going with our hands outstretched, but we kind of are, but if we're going to continue to want to make and to build these partnerships with the communities that we serve, we need to make sure that they are at the center. That the kinds of data structures that we've put into place may not necessarily work, and we need to try to come up with other structures where we can put people at the center, that they're not just a special field.
Yeah, David Weinberger, I guess, was in the Q&A after the panel. He was mentioning that there are authors in Tibet who the person of whom they are a reincarnation is an important part of the author field. And again, you can put that in MARC in like a special note, but there's no structured way to recognize and represent that. It's an add-on, it's an appendage, and there's no way to make it central.
Right.
Yeah. There was a article I was reading the other day, is by I think Stephanie Fu, who's in public radio, and it's basically like, y'all say you want to have diversity, like this is what you need to do, right? And one of the things she was mentioning in there is that there's the Diwali story or whatever that shows up at the appropriate time of year, but it's this is my cat Shazam. He likes to be included. Anyway, he's gonna try pushing my laptop off my desk, and his tail's gonna be like in the way, and his butt and stuff. Anyway, but what she was saying is, that these stories often, they don't meet the standard of journalism that in general we would expect stories to meet. It's like the fact that it has Diwali does not make the story. It needs to have characters and conflict and those things that journalists would look for in any other story. And she wants to hear stories that happen to have all sorts of different people and cultures, but that are really going after journalistic excellence in that same way. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about.
It
It's like,
is.
not just quilt pictures. You want to find like who are the people, who are the stories, who are the conflicts and issues that were very particular in there.
I mean, it goes back to the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, about how there's been a lot of talk online about diversity in library and information science. And it's like, it's great, but all we're basically doing is trying to fit people into the system. Again, we're trying to fit people into a system that was not designed for them, that was basically set up for them to fail. And is that fair? Or should we be looking at a way to radically redevelop the system so that it's equitable to everybody? And no matter what you bring to the table, it's not a liability, it's a strength. And that can only help us be better. So it's a very, very similar idea.
So I think I'll make this the last question because I don't think I can top it, but how would you change the system to make it more like that?
I get in trouble when I say stuff like this, but one of the things that I would really like to do is to abolish the MLIS, and not necessarily not completely abolish the MLIS, but there are people. When I was in undergraduate school, I partly worked my way through undergraduate school by working in a library. Mm-hmm. And there were people who were there. They would be, if they were in Canada, they would be called library technicians, but they were library assistants, and you didn't need like a special degree or a special, diploma or anything to do it. But these are people who either, they might not have gone to university even, but even the ones who had gone to university, they did not have a master's degree, but they had been working in the library in supervisory capacity for, in some cases, decades, plural. But because they did not have the approved stamp, they couldn't go any higher. Even when, people who did have the stamp of approval or who had a PhD would go to these people because they were well-known problem solvers, and everybody trusted they trusted their thoughts, and they trusted their recommendations and what have you. But because, for whatever reason, either by choice or by circumstance, they didn't have that master's degree, they couldn't be a librarian. And that, to me, because when I look at the people, especially in Atlanta, but even here in Vancouver, when you see the people, the stratification amongst people of color who work in libraries versus white people who work in libraries, all the people of color are almost all in the non-professional class. And they've been working there for a very, very long time. And they might be able to be a supervisor, but they'll never be a librarian. And certain perks come with that librarian title. And the one way that we can make sure that we can start to open things up a little bit is to say, hey, so-and-so doesn't necessarily have a master's degree, but she's been working here and she knows this system better than everybody else. Why can't we just have her be a librarian? Somebody's at my door.
I did not order you a pizza or anything.
Yeah.
If you need to go, we can wrap up.
Okay, I just want to go real quick and see who it is. Is that all right? Or do you want to just wrap up? I mean, I feel like I
think we're on the trajectory toward wrapping up, and I'm not quite sure how to edit out things on YouTube. So let's wrap up.
But yeah, that's just one way, I think, that you can, start looking at people who have been working in libraries for long periods of time and look at the job descriptions and the job responsibilities and the things that are necessarily, the things that have been set aside for people with a master's degree. Start giving some of those things to people who have been working here for a long time, who you trust. And I know some people will say, well, that contributes to the deprofessionalization of the profession. So be it. If it means that we're getting, different people into the field, I'm kind of all for that.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the show and telling us how to break and remake the world in better ways with policy and technology and all of that. I'm so excited that you got to be my first guest.
Thank you.
It's an awesome way to kick things off. And I encourage everyone who's watching this video who can be in Vancouver to go watch Cecily's keynote, because it'll be awesome. And Chris, because that'll be awesome too. Okay. Have a great rest of your evening. And thanks for talking.
Thank you. Bye.